71 degrees below zero. At this temperature, your breath turns to ice crystals instantly. Your skin freezes in seconds. In 2024, 78-year-old Agnes Miller lay broken in the snow of the coldest village on Earth. No human could hear her screams. No rescue team was coming. She was minutes from death. But then, something impossible happened. A creature that shouldn't even exist in the northern hemisphere, let alone in a Siberian blizzard, decided that today, Agnes would not die. To understand why a creature native to the bottom of the world saved a woman at the top of it, we have to look at the woman herself. Agnes Miller was not your typical grandmother. Born in Chicago but transplanted to the brutal wilderness of Yakutia 40 years ago, she was a relic of a different time. She lived in Oymyakon, a place known as the Pole of Cold. This is a village where engines must be kept running 24/7 so the fuel doesn't turn to gel, and where wearing glasses is dangerous because the metal can freeze to your face and rip the skin off. Agnes stayed in Oymyakon for one reason: memory. Her late husband, Dr. Arthur Miller, had been a brilliant, eccentric zoologist. He had come to Russia to study extreme cold adaptation in animals. When Arthur died of a heart attack in 2019, everyone expected Agnes to pack up and return to the States. She didn't. She stayed in their reinforced, isolated cabin on the outskirts of the village, guarding Arthur's life's work. Or rather, guarding him. His name was Winston. Winston was a king penguin. Now, you might be asking, what is a king penguin doing in the Arctic Circle? Penguins live in the Antarctic. Literally, on the other side of the planet. Winston was a rescue, a biological anomaly that Arthur had saved from a failing illicit exotic animal trade ring in Eastern Europe years prior. Because Winston had been raised in captivity and had a deformed flipper, he couldn't be released into the wild. Arthur had built him a state-of-the-art, climate-controlled habitat attached to the main cabin, a massive, glass-walled solarium kept at a balmy -10 degrees, complete with a saltwater pool. To the villagers, Agnes was the crazy American bird lady. To Agnes, Winston was the last piece of Arthur left. He stood nearly 3 feet tall, with that regal patch of orange on his neck and a personality that was half toddler, half security guard. The 14th of January 2024 started like any other Tuesday in hell. The forecast warned of a deep freeze, a meteorological phenomenon where the high-pressure system locks the cold in, driving temperatures down to historic lows. Agnes woke up at 6 a.m. It was pitch black outside and would remain so for hours. The thermometer on her kitchen wall read 62 degrees Celsius, 79, 6 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold, but manageable for a woman who chopped her own wood. She made her coffee, put on 3 layers of wool, and walked to the reinforced glass door that separated her living room from Winston's habitat. "Morning, Your Majesty," she rasped. Winston, standing by his pool, honked a sound like a donkey braying through a trumpet. He waddled over to the glass and tapped his beak against it. This was their ritual. He wouldn't eat his fish until she pressed her hand against the glass. But that morning, Winston was agitated. He wasn't doing his usual morning bow. He was pacing. His wings were flapped out, and he kept tilting his head toward the ceiling of the enclosure. "What is it, boy?" Agnes muttered, taking a sip of coffee. "Barometric pressure getting to you? Animals know before we do. That is a fact of nature." Winston wasn't reacting to the cold. He was reacting to the silence. At 8:15 a.m., the hum stopped. In Oymyakon, silence is the sound of death. The low, constant vibration of the main diesel generator in the external shed was the heartbeat of the house. It powered the electric heaters, the water pump, and most importantly, the filtration and cooling systems for Winston's habitat. The lights flickered once, twice. Then, the cabin plunged into darkness. Agnes froze. The silence was deafening, broken only by the wind howling outside like a wounded animal. She glanced at the indoor thermometer. The digital numbers were still lit by the battery backup, but they wouldn't hold for long. 62 degrees Celsius outside. Inside, the temperature would drop rapidly. The cabin was insulated, but nothing retains heat forever against that kind of cold. If the pipes froze, They would burst. If the heat didn't come back on within an hour, she and Winston would both be in serious trouble. "All right," Agnes said, her voice shaking slightly. "Just a tripped breaker. Just a clog in the fuel line. No panic." She grabbed her heavy flashlight and moved to the mudroom. She had to go outside. The generator shed was only 30 yards away. In a normal city, 30 yards is a walk to the mailbox. In Oymyakon, during a deep freeze, 30 yards is a spacewalk. She pulled on her heavy reindeer fur boots, her thick quilted pants, and the massive parka Arthur had bought her. She wrapped a wool scarf around her face, leaving only a slit for her eyes, and pulled on her fur hat. Finally, the heavy mittens. She looked back at Winston through the glass door. The emergency lights in his enclosure were dim. The penguin was standing right at the glass, staring at her. He didn't honk. He just watched, his dark eyes wide. "I'll be right back, Winston," she promised. She opened the heavy steel exterior door. The air hit her like a physical blow. It wasn't just cold. It was a solid wall of pain. The moisture in her eyes instantly turned to grit as her tear ducts froze. The air in her lungs felt like swallowing broken glass. She stepped out into the white void. The temperature had dropped. It wasn't 62 degrees Celsius anymore. Later, meteorologists would confirm that a pocket of supercooled air had settled over the valley floor, pushing the temperature down to a staggering 71.2 degrees Celsius, 96.1 degrees Fahrenheit. It was a temperature that rivaled the lowest ever recorded in human history for an inhabited place. Agnes kept her head down, fighting the wind. The flashlight beam cut a thin slice through the swirling snow, but it was useless beyond 3 feet. She navigated by memory, counting her steps. 1, 2, 3. The cold at this level does strange things to the brain. It slows your thoughts. It whispers to you that it would be easier to just sit down. Agnes gritted her teeth, fighting the mental fog. She had to fix the generator. For Winston, she reached the shed. Her gloved hands fumbled with the latch. It was frozen shut. "Come on," she grunted, slamming her shoulder against the wood. Ice shattered. The door groaned open. Inside, the shed was only slightly warmer than the outside. She shone the light on the massive diesel generator. The silence of the machine was terrifying. She checked the fuel gauge. Full. It hadn't run out. She pulled off her right mitten, a dangerous risk, to check the intake valve. Her bare fingers burned as they touched the metal, the skin instantly crying out in pain. She worked fast, ignoring the agony. There. The fuel filter was clogged with gelled diesel. The additive hadn't worked. "Stupid, stupid," she hissed. She grabbed the spare filter from the shelf, her fingers growing stiff and clumsy. She swapped it out, her hands shaking violently, not from fear, but from the body's desperate attempt to generate heat. She put her mitten back on, but her fingers felt like wooden dowels inside the wool. No feeling. That was bad. Now came the hard part. The starter battery was dead from the cold. She had to use the manual pull cord. Agnes was 78, but she was strong. She braced her foot against the frame, grabbed the handle with both hands, and pulled. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. "Please," she begged. She pulled again. Chug, chug, chug. Silence. "Come on, Arthur, help me out here," she whispered to the ghost of her husband. She took a deep breath of the razor-sharp air and pulled with everything she had. A surge of adrenaline, a scream of effort. The engine roared to life. The shed vibrated. The lights on the control panel flickered green. "Yes," she cried out, the sound muffled by her scarf. She waited a minute to ensure it held. The hum became a steady rhythm. Heat would be returning to the house. The pumps would restart. Winston would be safe. Relief flooded her body, and that was her mistake. Relief makes you careless. Agnes turned to leave the shed, eager to get back to the warmth. She stepped out of the shed door, but in her haste, she didn't notice the patch of black ice, hard, transparent ice created by the sudden temperature drop right on the threshold. Her reindeer boot found no traction. Her feet went out from under her. Agnes didn't just fall. She was launched. She slammed hard onto the frozen earth, her hip taking the full force of the impact. A sickening crack echoed louder than the wind. Agnes screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the storm. She tried to stand, but her left leg collapsed under her, sending a fresh wave of blinding nausea through her body. Her hip was shattered. "No," she whimpered. "No, no, no." She looked at the house. It was 30 yards away. The lights were back on inside. She could see the warm yellow glow of the kitchen window. It looked like heaven. She tried to crawl. She dug her elbows into the snow and dragged her body forward. 1 inch, 2 inches. The pain was absolute, encompassing her entire universe. But worse than the pain was the cold. Lying on the ground is a death sentence in Yakutia. The ground sucks the heat out of the body faster than the air. The cold began to seep through her parka, through her wool layers, hunting for her heart. She dragged herself 5 yards, 10 yards. Her vision began to tunnel. The pain in her hip started to fade, not because it was healing, but because her nervous system was shutting down. Hypothermia was setting in. "I'm going to die here," she thought. The realization was strangely calm. "I'm going to die 20 yards from my front door." She looked up at the house again. Through the swirling snow, she could see the large glass wall of the solarium. The lights inside were bright, and there, pressed against the glass, was a black and white silhouette. Winston. He was watching her. Agnes's head dropped into the snow. She was so tired. It would be so nice to just close her eyes for a moment. Just a quick nap. Inside the solarium, Winston was going berserk. The king penguin had a vantage point the human eye didn't. He had been watching Agnes since she left the shed. He saw her fall. He saw her stop moving. King penguins are social creatures. They rely on the flock for survival. To Winston, Agnes was the flock. She was the alpha. And the alpha was down. Inside the warm enclosure, Winston did something he had never done before. He didn't wait for food. He didn't pace. He looked at the heavy, latched service door that connected his enclosure to the snowy backyard, a door that was strictly for maintenance, double-bolted to keep the Arctic out. But Arthur, in his wisdom, had installed a panic bar on the inside. A horizontal bar meant for a human to hit if they were trapped inside the enclosure during an emergency. Winston was a bird. He didn't understand mechanics, but he understood that that door led to Agnes. He backed up to the far wall of the pool. He lowered his head, streamlining his massive 35-pound body. Outside, Agnes's eyes fluttered closed. The cold was no longer painful. It was a warm, heavy blanket. The darkness was coming. Then, a thunderous crash shattered the night. Agnes's eyes snapped open. Through the haze of snow, she saw the impossible. The service door to the solarium had burst open, and standing there, framed against the light, stepping out into the lethal 71 degrees Celsius air without hesitation, was the penguin. Winston had left his sanctuary. He was coming into the kill zone. Agnes blinked, her eyelashes heavy with ice. She was hallucinating. That had to be it. The dying brain firing off its last sparks of comfort. But the hallucination was loud. Winston hit the snow with a wet thud. The instant the 71 degrees Celsius air hit him, the bird recoiled. King penguins are built for the Antarctic sub-zero, yes, but this was the Siberian pole of cold. This was an entirely different beast. The air was dry, alien, and ferocious. Winston honked a sound of pure confusion and alarm, but he didn't retreat. He saw the lump of blue parka in the snow 15 yards away. He waddled forward. In the wild, king penguins traverse ice fields by tobogganing on their bellies. Winston dropped to his chest. He pushed with his powerful feet, sliding over the snow crust. He moved faster than Agnes could ever crawl. He reached her in seconds. Agnes felt something heavy and wet shove against her shoulder. She opened her eyes. Winston was there, his beak inches from her face. He was making low, guttural clicking sounds, a distress call. "Go back," Agnes whispered, her lips barely moving. "You'll freeze." Winston ignored the command. He stood up, towering over her prone form. He looked back at the open door of the solarium, then back at Agnes. He grabbed the hood of her parka with his beak and pulled. It was a futile gesture. He was 35 pounds. She was dead weight. He couldn't drag her. Winston seemed to realize this. He stopped pulling. He looked around, his head darting frantically. The wind was picking up, burying Agnes faster. Her core temperature was dropping into the critical zone. She could no longer feel her hands or feet. The darkness was winning. Then, Winston did something that defied every instinct of self-preservation. In the Antarctic, when the cold becomes unsurvivable, penguins huddle. They create a scrum, a dense mass of bodies where they rotate the outer members to the inside to share warmth. It is the only way they survive the long dark. Winston was alone. There was no flock. So, he made one. He climbed onto Agnes. He didn't just stand on her. He lay his entire body lengthways across her chest, right over her heart. He spread his flippers wide, creating a blanket of dense, oily feathers and blubber. Agnes gasped. The weight was heavy, but the heat was immediate. A penguin's body temperature runs high, nearly 39 degrees Celsius, 102 degrees Fahrenheit. He was a living hot water bottle. "Winston," she breathed. He tucked his head into her neck, shielding her carotid artery, the vulnerable spot where heat escapes most rapidly from the wind. But it wasn't enough. One penguin couldn't heat a whole human in this temperature. And now, Winston was exposed. The cold was attacking his unfeathered feet and beak. He was sacrificing his own heat to keep her heart pumping. Agnes felt his shivering start. It wasn't the subtle tremble of a human. It was the violent vibration of a creature fighting for its life. "He's going to die with me," she realized. "We're both going to turn into statues right here." The thought sparked a tiny, fierce ember of anger deep in her gut. She could accept her own death. She could not accept his. "Get off," she groaned. Trying to push him, Winston pecked her glove hard. No, he pressed down harder, honking loudly into the storm. It wasn't a distress call anymore. It was a beacon. Agnes's eyes drifted to the solarium door. It was still open. The heat was pouring out. Wasted. Wait, the heat. The solarium was equipped with a high decibel temperature alarm. If the internal temp dropped below 0, a siren would blast to alert the house. But the siren was inside the house. No one would hear it out here. Except the main security system. Arthur had wired the solarium sensors to the external perimeter alarm. If the temperature dropped critically, it would trigger the catastrophic failure protocol. The protocol triggered the external strobes. Winston's body was shaking violently now. His honks were getting weaker. "The door," Agnes thought. "The door is open." The temperature inside the solarium was plummeting. Inside the house, sensors detected the sudden Arctic draft. The thermostat in the solarium registered the drop. +5 degrees Celsius, 0 degrees Celsius, 10 degrees Celsius. "Please," Agnes prayed. "Please, Trip." Inside the solarium, the digital display hit 15 degrees Celsius. Beep, beep. The silence of the tundra was shattered. Not by a siren, but by light. The external security strobes on the roof of the cabin exploded into life, brilliant, blinding flashes of red and white. Designed to be seen by aircraft, they pulsed against the snow, turning the world into a disco of emergency. The sound followed a piercing, oscillating wail that cut through the wind. 2 miles away, inside the village station, a light blinked on a dusty console. But it didn't matter. The villagers were hunkered down. No one was looking at consoles. However, the blinking lights were seen by someone else. Sergei, a local truck driver, was inching his massive Ural 4320 truck down the road of bones, trying to beat the storm. He saw the flashes in the distance. In Oymyakon, flashing lights meant only one thing: death or fire. He hit the brakes. Agnes didn't know how much time had passed. The world was just the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of Winston's heart against her chest. He had stopped shivering. That was bad. That meant he was entering the final stages of freezing. "Winston," she murmured. "Good boy. Such a good boy." She felt his beak nudge her cheek one last time. Suddenly, the ground shook, not from the cold, but from an engine, a massive, diesel-chugging beast. Headlights, brighter than the sun, swept over them. Doors slammed. Voices, Russian curses. "Here! Over here!" A voice roared in Russian. Agnes felt the weight of the penguin being lifted off her. "No!" she screamed, her voice a cracked whisper. "Don't hurt him. We have them. Both of them." It was a man's voice. Rough, urgent. Strong hands grabbed Agnes. She screamed as her broken hip moved, but the pain was a sign of life. She was lifted into the air. "The bird! Get the bird!" She was shoved into the cab of a truck. The heat inside was overwhelming. It smelled of stale tobacco and diesel, the sweetest smell she had ever known. Through the blurring vision, she saw Sergei, a giant of a man in a grease-stained coat, cradling Winston in his arms like a baby. The penguin was limp. "Drive!" Sergei yelled to his partner. "Hospital! Now!" The recovery was slow. Agnes spent 3 weeks in the Yakutsk Regional Hospital. Her hip was pinned with titanium screws. The frostbite on her fingers took months to heal, leaving her with permanent nerve damage, a constant tingling reminder of the night she almost died. But she didn't care about her hip. Every day, she asked the nurses the same thing. "The bird. Gdi Petitsa? Where is the bird?" They would just smile and say, "He is recovering." It wasn't until she was discharged and driven back to Oymyakon in a proper ambulance this time that she knew the truth. The ambulance pulled up to her cabin. The generator was humming. The lights were on. Sergei was there waiting for her. He opened the ambulance door and helped her into her wheelchair. "Agnes," he said in broken English. "Someone waiting." He wheeled her up the ramp, into the house, and straight to the glass wall of the solarium. The glass had been repaired. The temperature inside was a perfect 5 degrees Celsius. And there, standing by the pool, was Winston. He looked different. The tip of his beak was lighter, scarred from the frost. He moved a little slower. The cold had stiffened his joints, just like it had hers. But when he saw the wheelchair, his head snapped up. He waddled over to the glass. He didn't wait for her to touch it. He pressed his entire chest against the pane, spreading his flippers wide. Agnes wheeled herself closer. She placed her scarred hand against the glass, right where his heart would be. "You crazy bird," she wept, the tears hot on her cheeks. "You saved me." Winston threw his head back and let out a honk so loud it vibrated the glass. The story of the penguin of Oymyakon spread. Scientists were baffled. Ethologists argued that a penguin shouldn't have the cognitive ability to understand a rescue scenario, let alone the altruism to risk its life for another species. They called it a statistical anomaly, a coincidence. Agnes knew better. She knew that in the deepest cold, life recognizes life. She knew that love isn't just a human emotion. It's a survival instinct. Arthur had saved Winston from a cage. Winston had saved Agnes from the ice. The circle was complete. Agnes Miller still lives in Oymyakon. She still walks with a cane. And every morning, when she drinks her coffee, she watches Winston. They are 2 survivors, 2 misfits at the edge of the world, keeping each other warm in the long, dark winter. And if you ever visit the pole of cold, don't just look for the temperature gauge. Look for the window with the orange light. Look for the woman and the penguin, because sometimes the only thing that keeps us alive is the refusal to let go. Science says Winston acted on instinct, but Agnes knows he acted on love. Who do you think was right? If this story warmed your heart, do me a favor. Hit that like button so we can tell more stories like this. And if you want to see what happens when nature fights back, click that subscribe button. You don't want to miss the next one. Stay warm out there.